Good afternoon. I think it is just about afternoon. Welcome to the OxLEP Business Investment Fund webinar. My name is James Ruel. I'm a consultant who provides compliance support services to OxLEP. So I advise on all of the technical elements that underlie the various different schemes that OxLEP Business runs. Focusing today on the new capital grant scheme, the Business Investment Fund. I'm going to cover a bit of the background to the fund. I'll talk about some eligibility, the requirements for the grant and the grant projects. I'm going to cover the process and the timescales and provide you with some more detail on the first stage of the application process, the expression of interest stage. And talk everyone through the next steps. What I would say before we start is that we already have in excess of 85 people on the call, and we're still waiting for almost the same number again to gradually join us. If you do have any questions, please type them into the question box, which I think is a pop-up box on the right-hand side of your screens. As I'm sure you can appreciate, with limited time and something in the region of 150 people on the webinar, it's very unlikely that we will be able to answer every single question today. Where we can, we'll answer the questions when you ask them in the chat bar. There is a slot for questions to be posed to myself at the end of the presentation. And any questions that we don't get round to answering, we will capture and we will then come back after the webinar with answers to those questions. So the Business Investment Fund, I would imagine that a lot of you attended the breakfast briefing earlier on this week, so you'll be aware of the background to the fund. It's 2.1 million of capital funding, which is available up to the end of December 2021. That's important because the final date for submission of claims to OxLEP is the 31st of December 2021. These are co-investment grants, so that means that the grants need to be match funded with at least 50% match funding. So, for example, if you apply for a grant of £100,000, you would need to put in match of £100,000 against that. We're expecting the range of grants awarded to be between £25,000 minimum and £100,000 maximum. So in terms of project costs, we're looking at projects of between £50,000 and £200,000. What you will see from the guidance notes that some of you may have downloaded from our website and had a look through already is that we have the flexibility to approve grants outside of those ranges in exceptional circumstances. I put a very strong emphasis on the word exceptional. Our expectation is that there will be very, very, very few exceptional grants awarded, if any. We've struggled internally to come up with definitions of what an exceptional circumstance is likely to be. So it really is critical, if you're looking to try and get one of these exceptional grants, that you make that case extremely strong, extremely compelling within your application form, because as I say, we are expecting the grants to be within the range of 25 to 100,000. As I've said, this is a capital fund. It's part of the government's Getting Building Fund, aiming to accelerate the economic recovery following coronavirus outbreak. When we talk about capital funding, what we're saying is that the costs need to be those which could be capitalized in your account. accounts. The last point by way of introduction, very important one here, this is a competitive process and we're expecting very high levels of interest. Given that we have almost 150 people signed up to today's webinar, this is one of the largest grant webinars that I've run during my time working with OxLEP. And we've said in the guidance notes, or the Q&As, question and answers to the guidance notes, that our expectation is that the success rate is likely to be about 25%, so roughly 1 in 4. It's going to be competitive. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of the eligibility for this, applicants must have been trading within Oxfordshire for at least 2 years. So as they said in the webinar earlier in the week, that means you must have been trading in Oxfordshire since at least March 2019. This is not a scheme that is going to be supporting companies that are less than 2 years old. It's not going to be supporting pre-start businesses. It can, however, support pre-revenue businesses. So if you're a business that was set up 3 years ago and you're still bringing your product to market, whatever that may be, as long as you've been active within Oxfordshire for at least 2 years, then you will qualify, you'll be eligible to apply for this funding. We're expecting your grant project to be delivered within Oxfordshire, and the critical point is that you must be able to provide 50% cash match against the project. And in the expression of interest stage, please explain to us the source of that match, where you think that match will come from. We'll only accept a single application from a single business, so it's not possible for one business to put in 3 or 4 applications in the hope that one of their projects will be successful. I think if we allow that, the process will be unmanageable, we'll be swamped with applications. Please select the project that best fits the criteria for the Business Investment Fund. And of course, going on from that, you can only receive a single grant from the fund. It's also quite important to note that OxLEP runs a number of other grant schemes. There's the Innovation Support for Business scheme, there's the Kickstart scheme, there's the Escalate grant scheme, and various other COVID response and business resilience grants. It's critical to note that your success or failure in applications for any of our other managed grant schemes is irrelevant to the outcome of your application for a BIF grant, for a Business Investment Fund grant. You will not have any advantage from having been awarded or not been awarded one of the other grants, nor will you have any disadvantage from that. These grants are awarded on the merit of the applications received. Next slide. Thank you. In terms of the eligible activities, and I'm sorry that this is an extremely wordy slide, the objective is that the grants fund capital equipment, renovation or refurbishments, and specifically renovation or refurbishments that do not require planning permission, simply due to the time allowable. If the last date for claims under the scheme is the 31st of December this year, it is unlikely that you'd be able to go through the planning process and deliver your project by that date. It can include the obvious capital elements of buildings, plant, machinery, equipment, 3D printers, all the sort of standard capital items. But it can also include things around digital design and data analytical capability to help manage supply chains, and software and licenses costs, where these can be capitalized. Okay. It can include laboratory space as well as more normal office and building space, as well as actions to accelerate the adoption of clean tech and to support building back greener after COVID. Can include retail, so it can include structural enhancements to retail facilities, and it can include EPOS systems, the electronic point of sale type systems. I mean, what we're saying here is that there is a very wide range of activities that will be eligible under the Business Investment Fund, and it's for you to explain to us what the project that you're looking to deliver is, that those costs fall within scope of costs that can be capitalized in your accounts, and that they will deliver the sort of impact that we're looking for on your business and the wider economy. Next slide. Thank you. There are, of course, as with all things, a variety of costs that are not going to be eligible, things that we cannot fund under the Business Investment Fund. Some of these, I think, are fairly obvious, so we can't, or you cannot apply to use the funding as working capital for your business, nor can we fund the payment of wage subsidies, or unsurprisingly anything that would contradict, duplicate or undermine government schemes. VAT costs cannot be claimed unless you are a non-VAT registered business, so you can't recover that VAT anywhere else, or that you're not able, for whatever reason, to recover that VAT from HMRC. So what I'm saying there is that VAT is ineligible if it can be recovered elsewhere. Please seek advice on this. OxLEP cannot give VAT advice. We're not VAT experts. The critical thing for us is that that VAT cost cannot be reclaimed twice. You cannot reclaim it as part of your project costs from us, but also then reclaim it from HMRC as part of your standard VAT returns. Please seek advice. Your accountants or the agent who deal with your VAT returns should be able to advise on that. The grants can't be used to pay off any debts or refinancing, nor can they be used to purchase financial investments. They should not be used to meet statutory or legislative obligations, duties or requirements. So these are things that you have to do. Okay. An example of that might be a specific certification that is a legal requirement for the use of a building, whatever that may be. If that is a requirement, it's not something that will fall within scope of the grant. If, however, it is an optional extra, something that your customers would like to see, and that will help you be more competitive, help you to improve your ability to win business, that is eligible and falls within scope of the Business Investment Fund grants. We can't cover hire purchase or asset finance type arrangements, simply because that links back to the debt and financing type elements, nor is this grant going to cover the like-for-like replacement of obsolete equipment. So if you have a machine that manufactures widgets and it's coming to the end of its useful life and you're looking to purchase a replacement, same model, same make, that will allow you to make the same number of widgets in the same amount of time, that's not something that the Business Investment Fund is going to support. If, however, you're looking for a machine that will double the number of widgets you can manufacture, or enable you to make different widgets, or widgets that have a lower carbon life cycle within them, that is something that is not a like-for-like replacement, and is therefore something that the scheme would be able to support. And it would be for you within your expression of interest, and then in the full application, to make a compelling case for how that fits and how it adds value to your business. Next slide, thank you. This grant is a subsidy from the UK government, what would have been a state aid until 31st of December last year. And we're awarding the grant under the special drawing rights, the SDR, element of the UK subsidy control commitments. This is the element of UK subsidies that replaces the old de minimis scheme for new UK subsidies from the 1st of January 2021 onwards. For an SDR scheme, the maximum amount of SDR support and subsidy that you can receive is €325,000 over a 3 financial year rolling period. Now, if you've received support in 2019 or 2020 under the de minimis scheme, that will count towards your €325,000 of SDR allowance. What this means is that if you had maxed out your €200,000 of de minimis aid back in October last year, for example, you now have another 125,000 of SDR aid which you can use. So you've no longer passed the old de minimis threshold. We will ask the same questions about aid that you've received and the value of the aid or subsidy that you've received, and we require you to declare any de minimis aid that you've received and any SDR aid that you may have received since the 1st of January. Again, you will have been informed by your funding body whether any support that you've received falls under either de minimis or SDR. There's a couple of points to note when we're using SDR. The grants cannot be dependent on export performance, so we cannot link a grant to a specific export performance. So there can't be an explicit link to the amount of money that we give as a grant and you as an applicant successfully exporting 50% of your product or service. We can't make the grants contingent on the use of domestic content. So, for example, we can't say that we will offer you a grant provided you use at least 50% UK inputs. So that's not something that we can say. And understandably, we cannot provide the grant to a non-viable business unless that business has a valid plan to return to viability. So this is the replacement for the old undertaking and difficulty test. But what I think anyone out there who's had conversations with me or the team about undertakings in difficulty will be pleased to hear is that there is at the moment no particularly detailed definition of a non-viable business. If you think you are, please contact us and talk to us before you put your application in. Next slide. In terms of the financial requirements, I've already said that the grants need to be matched at 50%. So we will require some assurance that match funding is available. Within the first expression of interest stage, please just explain to us where that's coming from, and we'll then look for more detail on that in the full application stage. The match funding has to be cash match only. So what I mean by that is that at some point, cash has to change hands. So if, for example, your project involves some research and development work, which you capitalize in your accounts, part of those costs can be the salary costs of your staff carrying out the R&D work because you pay your staff. Cash leaves the business bank account and is transferred to the member of staff. So there is a cash match element in there. The element that we cannot allow is what used to be called in-kind contributions. This is contributions that are effectively gifted or discounted. So no cash changes hands because, for example, I have gifted my time to you and I have arbitrarily decided that my hourly rate is £2,000 an hour, for example. This is the sort of thing that did used to happen. You would see in-kind contributions being artificially inflated to make sure that they total the match requirement. So provided cash changes hands as part of the project, it will be an eligible match funding contribution. We will require copies of accounts covering the last 2 years of your business. We do understand that businesses that were formed 2 years and 1 month ago will not necessarily have submitted the second year's formal accounts to Companies House yet, in which case please provide us with draft accounts, management accounts, something that provides us with an overview of that second year of the business. I've said that match funding can be described in the main question. We're not looking for war and peace, a massive amount of detail on your match funding and your sources of match funding, but please ensure that it's clear and that we can understand where you think your match funding is coming from. In terms of cash flow for the grants, it's important to note that these grants are paid in arrears. So you will spend the money on your capital item, and once you have spent the money, once you've defrayed that cost can then be claimed back from us. So if you have a £100,000 grant with £200,000 of costs in it, and let's assume that you're only going to make a single claim on the 31st of December 2021. Please don't do this, by the way, it's more difficult for us and for you, but that would mean that you would have to have spent the whole £200,000 before you put the claim in and before we can reimburse the £100,000 of grant. We have set 2 specific claim dates, so there's a set claim schedule for the Business Investment Fund, the 2 dates being the 30th of September 2021 and the 31st of December 2021. It's critical to note that the 31st of December is an absolute cut-off date. Grant claims, I should say, that are received after the 31st of December 2021 are not going to be able to be paid. And claims will need to be supported with some evidence of expenditure. Within the full application, we're going to give you the opportunity to tell us what that evidence would be, but the expectation would be that it will be a copy of an invoice and a copy of a redacted bank statement demonstrating that the money has gone out. Thank you. There are also some procurement requirements. We're not going to ask specific procurement questions in detail at this stage, at the expression of interest stage, but they are important for applicants to bear in mind because we will require grant recipients, applicants to follow public procurement principles and OxLEP's own procurement policy. So the very brief summary on this slide says that below £25,000 you can just directly award to a supplier. We're not going to query how you choose to make that decision. Below the 189,000 threshold for supplies and services, or the 4.7 million threshold for works, would need to be an advertised open competition. So with a specification and a deadline and some scoring criteria. Above those thresholds needs to be a very similar open competition, but would have to be advertised on the UK's new Finder Tender website. Please be aware that the Finder Tender website, we would expect an opportunity to be advertised for around about a month, whereas you could do 2 to 3 weeks for the open competition below the thresholds. So it's important that you understand what sort of procurement you may or may not need to follow. And similarly, although we're not asking for quotes at the expression of interest stage, you will need to have a clear idea of how much your project will cost, because we're going to ask you for cost details as part of the expression of interest stage. For the expression of interest, we're not going to hold you necessarily to them, but they should be accurate. It's the full application stage at which we'll require much more detailed and accurate costings. With all of these things, it may be necessary that you have to use a single tender justification. So there may be a situation in which there is only one supplier who can meet your need for whatever reason. It is not impossible to do that, but it is absolutely critical that that is justified very compellingly and in some detail as part of your full application. It's going to be absolutely critical that where you insist that only a single supplier can meet your need, that we can justify that to any auditors that come to review the programme. Next slide. So in terms of the process, the Business Investment Fund operates a two-stage process. The first stage is a very short expression of interest stage, which captures a variety of business-related and eligibility-related detail, as well as a brief summary of the project. And this is then assessed against the eligibility criteria. The sort of things that we've talked about. Has the business been operational in Oxfordshire for 2 years? Is it able to receive a special drawing rights aid from OxLEP? Is the activity within scope? So it's not one of those ineligible activities that we listed in the guidance notes on the slide earlier. We aim to turn that around quite quickly, and the timelines are set out on the next slide, which I'll get to in a moment. And the second stage is then a full application, to which successful expression of interest applicants will be admitted. Invited. The full application will then be assessed and scored, and then reviewed by a selection panel. And after that, grant offers will be issued to successful applicants. So in terms of the timescale, the expression of interest will go live within a few minutes of the end of this webinar, provided I don't overrun. We're expecting that to be 1 o'clock today. So the expression of interest link will go live on the OxLEP website. If you have any questions relating to the expression of interest, the deadline for those is 5 p.m. on the 17th of March, and the email address is set out in all of the guidance notes, and it is capitalgrant@oxfordshirelep.com. The expression of interest itself will need to be submitted to us by 5 p.m. on the 19th of March. So we would recommend that people don't all try and submit the expression of interest at 4:55 p.m. on the 19th of March, simply because we're wary about internet capacity. It's not unknown that systems have problems if too many people use it all at once. If possible, please spread your submissions out in the preceding days. We will then review them, and we will come back to you with the outcome of your expression of interest, and if relevant, an invitation to the full application on the 1st of April. Okay. The deadline for that full application to be submitted to us is 5 p.m. on the 20th of April. So we're basically giving 3 weeks. And then we're expecting to be in a position to inform applicants from the full application stage in early June 2021. And as I've said before, the final deadline for claim submission is the 31st December 2021. It's worth noting that our expectation is that this will be a single round. So we'll have one expression of interest stage followed by a single full application stage, as a result of which we will be in a position to issue grant funding agreements and offer letters to the whole somewhere between 20 and 80 projects that we're expecting to fund under this scheme. I make no promises, but it is remotely possible that if we do not commit all of the money, we will go back out with a second round. But unlike most of the other grant schemes that OxLEP runs, our expectation this time is that this will be a single round for the Business Investment Fund. And the level of interest that we've seen so far, certainly in this workshop, suggests that that is a realistic expectation. Thank you. So the expression of interest itself, it's an online portal that will be accessible from a link in the OxLEP Business website. And it's got a series of sections within it. The first section is fairly technical. It will ask you details about your business and your eligibility. So it'll be questions about length of time trading in Oxfordshire, your eligibility to receive special drawing rights aid. There's then a section that asks for financial details. So this is where you're able to upload 2 years worth of accounts and provide financial details and backgrounds of the business. There's then a section on the project summary and the impacts that you will generate from that project. So this is things like jobs created and safeguarded, new products introduced, that sort of thing. This is a 1,000-word section, so it is a short expression of interest document, as I said. And it's critical here that you outline the project that you intend to provide, the impact it will have, and make sure that you tell us enough that we can understand the project that you plan to deliver. I've mentioned earlier that this is the place to put in a sentence or two about sources of match funding. This could be as simple as the match funding will come from the company's cash reserves. It could be as simple as the match funding will come from our projected revenue over the next 6 months. Whatever it is, please explain it to us so that we can understand where the match is coming from. And this is the place to set out the argument for your compelling project that's going to deliver against the objectives of the fund. There's then a section to confirm the project dates to ensure that another eligibility check, the final claim can be submitted by the 31st of December. There's then an equalities section, a data monitoring section on the applicant. Now that's an optional section, as with all of our equalities data, and an electronic signature section, so we get a confirmation from you. And the data that you put into the expression of interest will pull through into your full application when you're invited to it. So you won't be required to re-enter all of your business information, company number, and so on. That will all pull through from the expression of interest. Crucial proviso, or not yet. Thank you. A bit enthusiastic there. Crucial proviso that we always make with the online portal when we use it is that we cannot guarantee it will work with mobile technology. So what we mean by that is that if you try and submit your expression of interest on a mobile phone, we can't guarantee that it will work. It should, but we cannot guarantee it. We recommend that you have access to a computer, a laptop or a desktop in order to submit the expression of interest. Now you can go to the next slide, thank you. In terms of the assessment of the EOIs, this is a very short and simple slide. They're really basically due diligence checks. They are yes, no, eligibility type questions. Can the applicant receive the grant? Has the applicant spent 2 years trading within Oxfordshire? Is the proposed activity within scope for the Business Investment Fund? Does the proposed activity include one of the ineligible elements that we've set out in the guidance notes? Basically, this is an entirely objective stage, and it's a series of yes-no questions as we run through. and we will, if necessary, come back to you with clarifications. So if, for example, within the project finances, you've put, we're looking for a grant of £100,000, we're looking for total costs of £200,000, and you then type in that your grant rate is 500%, 500, we will come back to you for clarification. Do you really mean 500? Was that a typo? And you would then come back to us and say, yes, I pressed 0 too many times, it should be 50%. So we'll come back for factual clarifications if required. Next slide, thank you. So then the full application, I was then going to give a brief introduction to the full application. This is another online form which will be at least partially pre-populated from your expression of interest, but it is significantly longer. The reason that we're doing a two-stage process is to try and make sure that it's only eligible projects that we are able to fund that put a significant amount of time into drafting a full application for us. So this will include a description of the grant project, as you would expect, a description of the grant impact on the applicant business. So this is what I want to do, this is how I plan to spend the money, and this is the impact it will have on us, on the business. And beyond that, then the benefit to Oxfordshire and the wider economy. So having had the impact on the business, this is the wider benefit that we have from the grant. There's a section that will ask about risk management and risk mitigation. How do you propose to manage this project so that it can be completed in the tight timescales and to budget? There will be a section that looks for quotes and procurement details. So this will be the place if you are if you're doing a direct award for less than £25,000, this will be the place to upload a quote from an organisation or to explain to us what your procurement approach will be. And then there'll be a section that allows you to enter details about project costs, which may include things for which you haven't got quotes, so any capitalised staff costs, for example, and to explain the value for money for the programme, for your project. Okay. And the full application form will then go for assessment and scoring. So the next steps. The expression of interest form goes live, as I said, at 1 p.m. today. The one thing I realise I don't have on my screen with GoToWebinar is any kind of clock, so I have no idea how close we are to 1 o'clock or whether I've overrun. The next steps for you will be to draft your response, especially the 1,000-word section. Most of the other parts of the expression of interest form, effectively they don't require much thought. Your company number is your company number, your VAT number is your VAT number, you put those in. It's the 1,000-word section that is critical for enabling us to understand that your project is in scope, is eligible and is deliverable within the timetable. And submit it by 5 p.m. on the 19th of March. As I've said, questions should be sent by email, please, to the capitalgrant@oxfordshirelep.com. We have created an initial set of questions and answers, a Q&A set, which is on the OxLEP website. We will update this with questions from the webinar, questions that we receive by email. So there'll be a growing set of Q&As as time goes on. And at the top of the first page of the Q&As, you'll see a last updated date. And that date will change each time we update the Q&As. The one thing that I would say on that is if it is possible to avoid giving us confidential or commercially in confidence information when you're asking your question, please do. We will not share that information, obviously, but what we will have to do is turn your question and our answer into a more generic question and format that can be shared on the Q&A stage. As with all these sort of grant schemes, it's critical that all of the potential applicants are given access to the same information. And the other thing says that there'll be another webinar for the companies who, after the expression of interest stage, have been invited to the full application stage. And in that webinar, we will run through the process for the full application stage, as well as the requirements for the full application form in much more detail. Next slide. So I'm going to stop there. I believe my colleague Georgia is going to reappear to curate the questions for us. I've seen a few that have come in and been answered within the chat, although I must admit I haven't been able to read them as I've been talking. But I'm going to have another swig of my coffee and hand over to Georgia for a moment.
Yeah, so you haven't run over yet. We've got a couple minutes left just to answer some questions. So as you can imagine, we've had loads of questions throughout the webinar. So what I've tried to do is just sort of group some of them together that we can answer now. But if we haven't been able to get back to you throughout the webinar, then we will be following up through email. So your question will be answered at some point. Okay, so the first question is, how many expressions of interest are you expecting to receive, and what is the likely success rate?
Number of expressions of interest we're expecting to receive is a lot, he says very unhelpfully, not naming a number. I think to give you some idea, looking at the number of attendees on this webinar, there have been about 100 businesses, individuals, probably each individual business on the webinar. So I would expect at least 100 expressions of interest. More realistically, we're going to be looking at about 160. Given that we're expecting from the Q&As, we said that we thought the success rate would be about 25%, so 1 in 4. If we're looking to give out between 20 and 80 grants, that suggests that we're going to get somewhere between 80 and 240 expressions of interest. This is the first time we've run this sort of capital grant scheme. So that gives you some idea of the sort of working scale we're expecting.
Yeah, that's definitely really helpful. So the next question is, what can I use as match funding, and can you give any examples of what will be acceptable? Okay,
so match funding, as I said in the presentation, needs to be cash. So at some point in the process, cash needs to change hands. So essentially anything that you pay for as a business is potentially eligible match. The second thing for the match is that it needs to be costs, because this is a capital scheme, that you can capitalize in your accounts. So what that means is that there are a lot of costs that you would ordinarily think of as being revenue. So things like software, things like R&D, staff salaries, that sort of thing, which could be capitalized in your accounts. If you can do that, then those are eligible capital match items for this program. So my examples would be an R&D innovation type project could use staff costs where they can be capitalized. The simplest example is that you buy a piece of equipment for £100,000, you have £50,000 in your bank account, you pay for it, and the other 50,000 is then reimbursed from OxLEP.
Okay, that is great. Okay, I think we have time just for one more question. So what is SRD and how does it link to my remaining de minimis state aid allowance?
Okay, the SDR is the special drawing rights. It's the replacement of the old de minimis scheme, which was an EU state aid scheme. SDR is a UK subsidy scheme with a higher 3-year allowance. So it's €325,000. It's all done in euros because it's part of our trade and cooperation agreement with the EU, versus the old de minimis schemes, €200,000. Any aid that you received under de minimis counts against your SDR allowance. So if you've had £150,000 of de minimis aid, then you have already used 150,000 of your SDR allowance. And any SDR aid that's been given since the 1st of January, when it came into force, will also count against that allowance. So what we will do as part of the eligibility checks is ask for details about any de minimis or SDR aid that you've received over the last 3 years.
Okay, so we are running slightly over, so I think we should just leave it there. Like I said, any questions that have already been asked, we will get back to you following the webinar. And as James mentioned, there is the Q&A sheet on our website, so make sure you check that one as well. Thank you.
And the slides and presentation recording will go up on the webinar. Presentation recording possibly on Monday due to the size of the recording and the time it takes to download it.
Yeah.
It will all be available.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, James.
Thank you, and good luck to everyone.